Hi friends, welcome to another video of Lit Horizon. Today we are going to discuss about the poem I Too written by Langston Hughes. Before getting into the poem, we have to know about the poet and the background details of the poem. Langston Hughes is an African American poet. He is the leader of Harlem Renaissance and he is known for the insightful portrayal of black life in America from 20s through 60s. Some of the dominant themes in his poetry include racism, American identity, double consciousness, rootlessness, etc. The poem I Too was initially titled as Epilogue when it appeared in the collection The Weary Blues in 1926. The poem is actually a response to Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing because in the poem I Hear America Singing, Walt Whitman depicts America as a diverse country with different people doing different kinds of jobs, but they are unified. Langston Hughes says that Walt Whitman neglected the real conflict that divide Americans. He didn't mention about slavery and he doesn't consider black people at all. I Too is a free verse poem that focuses on the African American identity within the dominant white culture of America. The poem is written from the perspective of an African American man. He can be either a slave or a free man because throughout the poem he is mentioning about segregation, so we can assume that he is a slave or a free man. The speaker is trying to portray the real life of blacks. If we go through the poem, then we can see the hope of the poet or the hope of every African Americans that once they can enjoy the fruit of freedom. We can divide the poem into three parts, okay? And the first part is all about the discrimination against African Americans. Second part deals with the hope of the poet for a bright future. And the final part focuses on the recognition of goodness in blacks. While coming to the first part of the poem begins with the line, I too sing America. Here, the poet uses the personal pronoun I to show that he is also a subject of the poem. He says that he is singing about the greatness of America just like the white singers of 19th century sang the tribute. And the other thing is that the line sounds positive, right? The poet says that he is proud of being an American, but the problem is that he is different from an average American. Next, the narrator introduces himself as a dark brother, that is, his complexion is dark and he is a brother of white Americans. He says that all black people have contributed and is still contributing to American history and culture. Their contributions are as important as those made by the whites. He says that all Americans should be united as one. From this, we can say that not all Americans are enjoying the same opportunity that they dreamed of. The colored people were always treated as inferior. Why this segregation exists? Why blacks are always haunted and why they have to suffer? The only reason is that whites are not ready to treat them as one among them. He is reminding the whites that black people are their brothers and they have to keep the feeling of togetherness. Next, the speaker takes our attention to a kitchen, and the kitchen symbolizes lack of opportunity. The speaker says that whenever a visitor comes to the white's house, they try to hide the servants. That is, the blacks were sent off to the kitchen to have their food. This shows the hypocrisy of white communities. This is actually one of the common practice of segregation during the 20th century. African Americans were the victim of Jim Crow's law in 1920s. Only because of this, Black were forced to eat, work, and travel separately from the white counterparts. They have only few legal and civil rights. Just imagine what will be the situation. Living a life without freedom and consideration. How terrible it is. I have already told you that blacks were forced to remain in the kitchen. But the poet is happy with the attitude. And he says that he can eat well, he can be strong enough so that he can fight against racism. While coming to the second part, we can see the hope of the poet that once the eradication will end. He says that tomorrow he will join others at the table and no one will dare to send him back to the kitchen. He foresees a racially equal society in the future. In the last part of the poem, the poet mentions that the white men will realize that there is nothing in color. Here, he is not mentioning about the physical beauty but the beauty of existence. The white people will realize that blacks are beautiful and feels ashamed of their misbehavior upon blacks. He ends the poem with the line, I too an American. He says that he too is an American because the dominant members of white society are pushing him aside because he is an African American. In this part, we can see that he is strong enough and now no one will deny him what he deserves. He will have the same opportunity and equality that whites have. But we can say that the blacks' desire to attain freedom has remained as a dream. This is all about the poem. If you are happy with the video, then please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe.